Good evening. Welcome, everybody. We'll start in a moment. We'll allow some more people to join us. Well, good, everybody. We'd like to take full advantage of our time tonight. So I'd like to welcome you all to Beth-El Tzedek's Cocktail Judaism. This is our first program for the Hebrew year 5782, which we have just started. I am Rabbi Dennis Sasso, and I am pleased to host tonight's important conversation. So this is Cocktail Judaism. So I will cup and toast to all of you, l'chaim. I also have a cup of tea here with me. One is, of course, to still the spirit, and the other is to calm the soul. So this is an opportunity for us to have a conversation on a subject of great seriousness. And of course, this is a conversation, the distinctive mark of which will be civility and respect. We're going to be talking about reproductive rights after Texas. The issues before us do not just impact women's health. They are a matter of public health that impacts on all people, adults, children, and families. The issue is wrongly framed in the language of pro-life versus pro-abortion. Supporting reproductive rights is a pro-life stand. Supporting the right of a person to choose is a pro-life stand. So we're talking tonight about citizenship rights, about human rights, civil rights, religious freedom. Our panelists tonight will shed light on the many dimensions of the topic, from medical, legal, public policy perspectives to religious views on this subject. Unfortunately, the religious view is often subsumed under the anti-abortion banner. We will learn tonight that one can support the right to abortion and still be religious. We are, ironically, living at a time when other countries are expanding women's reproductive rights and legalizing abortion, and yet the United States is moving in the direction of more restrictive policies, the likes of Poland and Nicaragua. We will come to the conversation in a few moments, but first, I would like to thank Sherry Lip-Levine, our executive director, and Jackie Goldstein, our marketing and communications coordinator, for keeping us connected tonight and for helping with many of the arrangements leading to this conversation. I became very concerned earlier today when Facebook was down for about 6 hours, as many of you know. So I said to Jackie to give Mark Zuckerberg a call, and it was fixed very promptly. We are very pleased and honored to have three distinguished panelists and an additional guest. Panelists are Sheila Siski. Sheila was a Republican candidate for Congress in 1980, and she won the GOP primary as a pro-choice candidate. She served as executive director of the Indiana ACL 1992 to 1998. She's been a professor of law and public policy at IUPUI from 1998 to 2020. And she blogs at www.sheilakennedy.net, and you can all visit her there. In fact, part of her presentation for this evening was already there earlier today. Our second panelist is Dr. Lee Meltzer, member of our congregation, graduated from IU School of Medicine in 1987, did her residency in OBGYN at the University of Maryland, and she is an OBGYN in private practice at North Hospital and an abortion provider at Planned Parenthood. married to Jeffrey. They have 3 daughters, Rebecca, Jessica, and Alex. And the third panelist I've come to know recently, her name is Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso. She was ordained in 1974 and for 36 years served as co-senior rabbi at congregation Beth-El Zedek. She is now the director of religion, spirituality, and the arts at the IUPUI Arts and Humanities Institute, and has been doing that for 8 years since she retired from the position at Beth-El Zedek. Sandy was a co-founder of Women for Change Indiana, with Williams. She is the author of over 20 to be released this month, is entitled, it's about animals in the Bible. It's entitled The Raven and the Dove, the Big Fish, and the Stubborn Donkey. I have reason to believe that she may have patterned that last story of the stubborn donkey after somebody that I am very closely identified with. We are also pleased to have Jessica Bunch from the Offices of Planned Parenthood to join in answering questions and clarifying concerns during our Q&A. Jessica is an organizer for Planned Parenthood in Fort Wayne. Planned Parenthood for over 4 years. She indicates has allowed her many opportunities to advocate for families in Indiana. She loves her pets, reading novels, and working on behalf of the best interests of the community. We welcome our panelists, our guests from Planned Parenthood, and all of you who have come to join us for what we anticipate will be a very informative and very positive conversation this evening. Thank you very much. And it's now my pleasure to turn it over to Sandy, who will carry on the conversation.
Well, welcome everyone. Actually, I just have a little piece of information for Dennis. I think because we're on 2 computers in separate rooms, we may be having a little internet connectivity issue. So if you, do you mind coming and joining me, or
I'll be glad.
or whatever Jackie tells you to do. Okay.
Okay. I'll come to the adjoining room. So I'll stand behind. I'll be here shortly.
Okay, that's fine. I don't know if that makes a difference given my technology wisdom. I'm just guessing that might be true. And besides, my daughter Debbie told me that might be true, so I know that it could be correct. So we have an incredible turnout. So thank you so much for being here. Ahead of time, I want to thank the panelists for spending time with us. And I really appreciate Jessica Bunch from who is in Fort Wayne for being on this call and also being able to answer any questions. You will not be able to unmute yourselves. However, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and at the end of our panel, we'll have an opportunity to answer many of them. So my role basically is to talk about what Judaism has to say about this issue. And as you might expect, there really is no one answer, but there are some basic principles underlying the various positions. And I should just say before anything else that Judaism does not believe that the government has any role in legislating on this particular issue. So most important, in Jewish law, the fetus does not have the status of personhood. So often discussions about abortion center on the issue of when life begins. But the real issue is when life begins to be human, right? Because plants are alive and a sperm is alive. So the question is, when does life begin to be human? When is human personhood begin? For Judaism, the fetus is potential life, a part of the mother, and not an independent human entity. Science can explain developmental timelines, but really it is religion that determines what exactly defines personhood. And on this matter, religious views differ. So believe it or not, there is a reference in the Bible to abortion. And if you want to look it up, you can look up Exodus chapter 21, 22. And the text says, if men strive and wound a pregnant woman so that she miscarries, but no harm befalls her, then shall that person be fined and the matter placed before judges. But if harm befalls her, then you shall give life for life. And it is this passage from which later rabbis and legal authorities derive their position on the permissibility of abortion. So the miscarriage of a fetus is not considered a capital crime. Only the death of the mother is considered homicide. Causing the death of a fetus in a fight is not murder, it's a civil offense. So that's an early distinction in biblical text. Now, of course, the rabbinic sources go on to say even more about the status of a fetus and the permissibility of abortion. So in one rabbinic source, it says the fetus is mere fluid before 40 days of gestation. Afterward, it is considered a physical part of the mother, not having a life of its own or independent rights. There are passages in the Talmud, a rabbinic resource, that refers to the fetus as ubar yerech imo, as actually the thigh of the mother. And you'll see this idea continue in understandings of what happens when a woman who is pregnant converts. If a woman converts while pregnant, the conversion is valid for her future child because the fetus is a part of her. Another reference in the Talmud states that if a woman is having difficulty giving birth, the physician may dismember the fetus in utero to save the life of the mother. In other words, personhood happens at childbirth, according to Jewish sources, when the head emerges from the womb. Until then, the life of the mother always takes precedence over the fetus. Abortion actually is not just permitted, but required should the pregnancy endanger the life or health of the mother. So while the fetus is not full human life, it is potential life that is to be treated with respect and dignity. So then, when is abortion allowed? So there's actually, well, I won't get too complicated with Jewish legal terms, but there's actually two arguments. One sees the fetus as what is called a rodef, a pursuer, who may be killed to protect the mother's life. For those of you who are interested, that's according to Maimonides. Okay, somebody's pursuing you to kill you, you have a right to defend yourself. That's one argument. The other argument is based on the notion that the fetus is not a nephesh. A nephesh means a fully viable human being, a fully viable person. That is the view of Rashi, a famous medieval commentator. So the stringent view in Jewish sources says that abortion is only permitted under severe circumstances where there is threat to the mother's life, or, this is very significant, grave psychological hazard to the mother. So it is not just physical health that is referenced, it's also psychological health. The more lenient position allows for abortion when there's any psychological or physical risk, because after all, the fetus doesn't have full personhood. Just to give you an idea what some rabbis have said, a 19th century rabbi said, a woman does have a duty to bring forth children, but no woman is required to build the world by destroying herself. Okay, this is not a recent commentary. This is from the 19th century. A former chief rabbi of Israel, so this comes from somebody who is more traditional, Orthodox, said, "It is clear that abortion is not permitted without reason. That would be destructive or frustrative of the possibility of life, but for a reason, even for a slim reason, such as to prevent her disgrace, then we have precedent and authority to permit it." Okay, this comes from an Orthodox rabbi. So believe it or not, we talked today about the morning after pill, the abortion pill. They had something like that in the Babylonian Talmud in the first centuries of the Common Era. The rabbis actually wrote about something, I have no idea what it was, called a koshel ikarin, which was a cup of roots that could be given to a person who is pregnant, who is having difficult childbirth, so she would miscarry. That's quite striking for centuries of the Common Era. There is another principle that Jewish law has that says we do not make a ruling unless the majority of the community can abide by it. So I'm sure you are aware of this, the majority of Americans believe that abortion should be legal all or most of the time. 73%, including over half of Republicans, support Roe v. Wade, and nearly 1 in 4 women will have had an abortion by age 45. 83% of American Jews say that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. So the overriding principle is you can't make a ruling that the majority cannot abide by. There are many such references today in the different movements to this. Overall, governmental legislation on abortion restricts religious freedom and limits women's ability to choose according to their religious beliefs. So let me just share with you some of the different Jewish movements' position, and then let you know that there are other, both in Islam and in mainline Protestant traditions, differing views regarding personhood. So just quote, first of all, most people think that Orthodox Jews want the government to interfere here. That is not the case. So I'll quote from an Orthodox rabbi who was writing in relationship to the recent Texas decision. The Texas decision on abortion is a violation of even the Orthodox Jews' religious freedom and physical freedom. The Texas abortion ban is not pro-life or pro-choice. It is about forcing fundamentalist Christian beliefs on the many who do not share those beliefs. And Agudat Yisrael is an organization of ultra-Orthodox communities, and they too have said they oppose the Texas bill. You would, of course, expect that the reform movement has said many things about freedom of choice. I'll just read something briefly. We are deeply concerned about Jews who will be unable to pursue an abortion in keeping with Jewish law, which mandates abortion when necessary to preserve the pregnant person's well-being. And then it goes on, as you might expect, the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the conservative rabbinical group, says the same thing. We learn in Judaism that while the fetus has a special status as potential life, full personhood does not begin at conception, but rather as birth, as indicated by the passage in Exodus, which I share with you at the beginning. Barring a woman's access of an abortion not only blocks her right to choose, but also her religious freedom. You may be interested in knowing that the National Council of Jewish Women is launching a campaign this month called 73 Forward, 73 Forward. 73 because that was the year that Roe v. Wade was decided. That campaign is to work toward keeping abortion legal and helping those who don't have the means to travel and pay for an abortion in places where it is less restrictive. If you want more information about Jewish positions on abortion, just look up National Council of Jewish Women and Abortion, and they have like a 56-page document to give you some background. Just so you have an idea, it's not just Judaism who feels this way. I'll just share a few other religious groups. The United Church of Christ, the Unitarian Universalists, and Judaism favor a right to abortion. Many of the nation's mainline Protestant denominations, including the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the Methodists. While they may wish for some limits, they are for choice. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, many American Baptists don't believe abortion is akin to murder. Presbyterians believe in choice. And among Muslims, there is no universally agreed upon moment when a fetus becomes a person. Some say it's 40 days. You see, we had that in Judaism, you know, it's near fluid in 40 days. Others say it takes 120 days for a human soul to be breathed into a fetus. Many Muslim religious leaders allow abortion in cases of rape before 4 months, and some allow it for a case of prenatal diagnosis of a disability. So you see, I just want to give you a sense. There are a variety of religious views on this issue, and to be pro-choice is a religious position. And there are lots of organizations that include clergy leaders who are speaking out on this behalf. So I'll just share with you this very end of a rabbinic letter that was being sent to senators actually in 2005. Simply put, this faith-based decision should not be circumscribed by the government. The decision to have an abortion is a deeply personal choice to be made by women, perhaps in consultation with their clergy, families, and physicians, and not by politicians or judges. Any infringement on these rights subverts the basis upon which our nation is built. So I think that gives you an overview, particularly of the Jewish position, but also of the large majority of religious leaders and their stance on this issue. So I am going to pass the baton on to Dr. Lee Meltzer. Please, if you have questions, write them down or put them in the chat, and we will come to them after our panelists have an opportunity to speak. Lee?
Thank you, Rabbi Sandy. I'm Lee Meltzer. As Rabbi Dennis said, I am an OBGYN. For the past 30 years, I have worked in Indianapolis for 23 of them. I was born and raised here. My family is all on, hopefully most of them are on this, this Zoom in solidarity. I also, so in 2016, I've always, in fact, it dates back to, I can remember during my confirmation when we used to go on a confirmation trip to Gucci and having a debate about abortion even then. So I was 15, now I'm 56, so we can all do that math. So this is not a new passion of mine, nor is it a new issue. It's amazing to me that here we sit in 2021, you know, 40, however many years that is, 21 plus 27, you know, 48 years after the decision of Roe v. Wade, and we're still having this discussion. And in fact, we have not moved forward but backward to a great degree in the last few years. But in 2016 and 17, I reached out to the then director of Planned Parenthood to see what I could do to help besides give money, and ultimately was onboarded and now do abortions about once a month or so at Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky, which is now also the Great Northwest. My purpose today is to talk about how access to abortion care is an integral part of women's healthcare. Women's healthcare is everything that I do. I don't take care of anybody but women. The positions of my professional societies, the American College of OBGYN, the Maternal Fetal Medicine Society, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, the American Board of OBGYN, all strongly support providing comprehensive women's health care, of which abortion is an integral part. Like Rabbi Sandy said, about 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their lifetime. That is just a fact. And the rate over the last 20 plus years or so has steadily decreased with a few blips here and there. But essentially from 1973, when Roe v. Wade was passed, I think it was about 16 to 17 per 1,000 women, the rate of abortion, and now we're at about 13. It's quite widely known and in the medical field that increasing access to abortion, increasing access to women's health care will only decrease the rate of abortion. Making abortion illegal or restricting access to abortion will not make abortion rates go down. They will just make abortion less safe, and the morbidity and mortality for women will go up. So the Texas law, as you probably all know, I'll just kind of go over it briefly, says basically abortion is illegal after a heartbeat is detected, which they're calling 6 weeks. In OBGYN language, 6 weeks of gestation is 6 weeks from the last menstrual period. It is not 6 weeks after conception. All right, so 6 weeks after the last menstrual period, which would generally be 2 weeks after someone conceives. So you're talking about people who, some people, maybe they are stressed and they think, oh, I've just missed a period. Some people are, might be irregular to begin with. So at 6 weeks, which is 2 weeks past the time when somebody who has a 28-day cycle would expect to get their period, that's 6 weeks. So clearly restrictive in the sense that many women may not know they're pregnant. Not that that matters, but in general, we have this law. And then because that is clearly unconstitutional, Roe versus Wade says that the government cannot intervene in a woman's right to choose. And so this is clearly the government intervening. However, as you probably all know, they being as clever as they thought they could be, got around this by not making the government the enforcers of this law, but instead regular civilians. So regular people like you or I could pick somebody in Texas and just say, hey, that person is thinking about having an abortion, is thinking about taking their wife or girlfriend to have an abortion, is thinking about driving an Uber to that appointment, is a doctor going to provide it, is a nurse or a doctor giving counseling for it, is going to make dinner for that person after, whatever. And that is aiding and abetting. And they can then bring a suit against that person. And if they win the suit, then they get $10,000 from that person and all of their legal fees paid for as well. So this is just regular citizens, and you don't have to be from the state of Texas. So that is what we're talking about here. Because of that, then the Supreme Court decided not to decide anything. In other words, to let this stand. And then now there's a couple of, ultimately now there's a doctor who advertised that he did an abortion on somebody after 6 weeks in Texas. And then there have been a couple of lawsuits. So now there's somebody to sue. Before there wasn't, normally you would sue the Attorney General, and Sheila will talk more about the legal ramifications of it. But essentially, there's no Attorney General to sue. There's no government official to sue. So you had to wait until there was an actual suit. So let's talk about what, okay, we know what 6 weeks is. And so that is how we universally date pregnancies in the OBGYN world, is from the date of your last period. As far as abortion care goes, there are 2 types of abortions. There are medical abortions and there are surgical abortions. Medical abortion, both are legal. And again, every state has its own restrictions on abortion, but generally speaking, an abortion until viability has been something that has been considered legal. So what is viability? Most of the OBGYN world, or the scientific world, considers about 24 weeks of gestation, or 24 weeks from the last missed menstrual period, as being viable, meaning a baby can live outside of its host mother and potentially survive. And I say potentially because only about 50% of babies at 24 weeks will survive, even with all the modern medicine miracles that we have now. And about 75 to 80% of them will have neurological deficits, but that's beside the point. At 24 weeks, we're considered viability. The first trimester of pregnancy is around 14 weeks, give or take. And so a first trimester abortion, and the only abortions that are allowed to be performed in Indiana outside of a hospital or an ambulatory surgery center, are up to 13 weeks and 6 days of gestation. So that is considered the first trimester. Medication abortion is legal up to 70 days after the missed menstrual period, or what we consider 10 weeks of gestation. Women can choose between at 10 weeks of gestation between medication abortion, which is taking pills. It's a 2-day process. You start it the first day, and then the second part of it you do at home somewhere between 24 and 48 hours after the first step, and then you essentially miscarry the pregnancy. That requires a little more follow-up to make sure that it happens correctly, and of course a lot of counseling as to what to call for and things like that. So about 40% of abortions are medication abortions. We'll get to, so the restrictions on medication abortion are such that in certain states, a medical provider, meaning a physician or an MD or a DO, has to provide and watch in person the person take the medicine. And so that's what we do at Planned Parenthood. In many states, it doesn't have to be that way, but it is, at least here in Indiana, that is one of our rules or laws. When the pandemic started, they did relax some of that and allowed the telehealth prescribing of mifepristone and misoprostol, which you can get anyway. The misoprostol part people can do on their own. It's the mifeprex, or the abortion pill, that is required to be taken in front of a physician. So they did allow some telehealth, but then of course they took that away when they felt like the risks of COVID weren't as significant anymore, and so they have restricted that again. There's been, it's always hard to tell you exactly what risks benefits are, but the huge bodies of literature that have and studies and retrospective reviews of outcomes have shown that there is absolutely very little risk to having telehealth services for medication abortion. And in fact, it increases people's access to care, which clearly we found out during the pandemic with all kinds of medical care that, telehealth has increased access to care and increased people compliance and all kinds of things, but that there's very little risk of prescribing mifeprex virtually, but nonetheless, that is restricted. Surgical abortion is a procedure that we do. Again, it has to be done by a provider, and that's not everywhere, or by a physician provider, I should say, not just a provider. But and in Indiana, it can only be up to 13 weeks, 6 days. And in fact, you can't even do it after that unless you have a genetic reason to do it. But at Planned Parenthood, we can do them up to 13 weeks, 6 days. Very few complications from abortion procedures, either medical or surgical, less than 1% of complications. And certainly, you know, there's quotes anywhere between 10 and 15% or 10 and 15 times higher risk to women during pregnancy and childbirth than there is during abortion. And so, you know, what the issue at stake here is not what I think or what you think about when life begins, right? Anybody can have and should have their own feelings about when life begins. Does life begin at conception? Does life begin at 6 weeks when there's a heartbeat? Does life begin whenever? The issue is whether your feelings about when life begins should restrict my access to comprehensive women's health care. And, you know, in fact, I would tell you that the answer is no. If you look back, like when the Constitution, you know, the founding fathers, they didn't have any restrictions on abortion. And in fact, the basic thought was until quickening, which means until you could feel the baby move, because of course we didn't have ultrasound, we didn't have early pregnancy tests, people didn't know when they were pregnant, until you felt quickening or felt fetal movements, it was okay to bring back the menses, which essentially meant induce a miscarriage. However, that could be done, right? Whether it was through herbs and medications, whether it was through medical care and whatnot. So, you know, the importance here is that it became an issue for whatever reason, and it became a very divisive issue and a religious issue, which I feel is inappropriate. Medicine, although I know that there are, you know, there's a lot of intersection between religion and medicine and government, but in my medical view, your religious feelings and are yours, right? And if you have a religious or if you have a feeling that you want to share, then you can talk to your clergy person if that is the person that gives you the most comfort or gives you the advice that you want to follow. But that is not everybody. There are people who have no religion, people who don't believe in any religion. And so I don't believe that religion and medicine should intersect really in many ways other than a person seeking out their own religious leaders if they choose to. Same with government. I don't believe government and medicine should have any intersection whatsoever, and government should really not have any other than doing what they should be doing, which is providing universal health care for everybody, in which case abortions would be free of charge and access to abortions would be universal, as well as access to reproductive health care, access to contraception, to prenatal care, to genetic counseling and testing for, you know, and these are all just female things. There's a whole host of other things, but, you know, in that respect, I think government has a role in healthcare, but I don't believe that they should have a role otherwise. So let's talk about from the perspective of Indiana itself and nationwide, but you know, I know we all live in Indiana, or not all of us, because I think people are on the call from outside the state. So what's happening in Indiana? I mean, there are a lot of states that are going to consider copycat laws, obviously, and so that is something that Planned Parenthood, I know, has already sent out notifications to see if those of us that provide abortion care want to get licensed to provide abortion care in other states like Illinois. Right now, we already provide care to, I mean, when I'm there, I will see people coming from as far as 7 hours away to have that. So what are the barriers from a medical perspective? There are a lot of barriers and access to care. The 6-week problem, obviously, is if you don't know you're pregnant. So any delay in recognizing that you might be pregnant will put you beyond that 6-week time period. A lot of maternal fetal complications don't come up or can't be diagnosed till later in the pregnancy. So that would essentially rule out terminating a pregnancy for any genetic problems or any maternal medical issues that could put the life of the mother in danger. The expense. Now, here's the problem. So many, and I'm going to make sure I don't forget anything, so I'm going to look here. If you look at what the barriers to care are, there are 38 states, including Indiana, who require the abortions to be performed by a licensed physician. So we already talked about that. We're one of those. 19 states require it to be performed in a hospital after a certain gestational age. And in Indiana, that gestational age is 13 weeks and 6 days, which is not that far along, or an ambulatory surgery center. So these are all, again, all of these laws are designed to make it more difficult to access abortion care. 43 states prohibit abortions after a specific point. In Indiana, again, really it's about 14 weeks unless the mother's life is in danger or there's rape, incest, or some kind of genetic abnormality. There might be questions ultimately about the, I believe it was 2003 ban on partial birth abortions. I want to say that that is not a medically recognized term. Partial birth abortion is not a recognized term in the OBGYN world. There is no such thing. And the word, just like pro-life, partial birth abortion is a phrase that is intended to shock and intended to make people visualize something that looks like a partially birthed baby being dismembered, and taken out of the mother's womb while it's still alive, right? So there is no such thing as partial birth abortion. What it is actually, in 2007, this was upheld again. What it means basically is trying to make sure that even fetuses that are born between 20 and 23 weeks that are terminated are not born alive. So for whatever that's worth, abortion performed after 14 weeks, there are people that do that surgically. You have to be specially trained to do that. And there's also, you can induce labor just like you would for a full-term baby. And so that's where this whole partial birth abortion argument came into being. So I just wanted to be here to say there is no such medically recognized term as partial birth abortion. So 33 states prohibit the use of any state funds for abortion. Indiana, you can only use state funds for abortion if the woman's life is in danger or if it's the result of rape or incest. There are at least half the states who allow insurance companies or prohibit insurance companies from covering abortion care or restrict insurance companies from covering abortion care. And Indiana is one of them. 45 states that allow providers to refuse to do abortions, which, I'm just going to put my 2 cents in there. That's fine, right? I choose to provide abortion care. XYZ colleague may choose not to, as long as they provide the facts to our patients and provide them with the appropriate people referrals, then I don't have a problem. If somebody doesn't want to perform abortions, just like I don't have a problem if somebody doesn't want to have an abortion. Don't have an abortion then. It's that's fine. Just like if somebody doesn't want to marry someone of the same sex, fine. But why it doesn't hurt anybody else if I have an abortion or if I provide an abortion to other women. And so that's where I think this whole terminology of pro-life, pro-choice, it's not pro-abortion, anti-abortion per se. It's pro-choice. You choose whether you can have whether you need to have an abortion for whatever reason, and there should be, in my opinion, no qualifications on, it shouldn't qualify what is okay to get an abortion for and what is not. That's just us being paternal and paternalistic, and I don't believe that that's appropriate. So, but the other part of that is 42 states, including our state, allows hospitals to refuse to allow abortions to happen in their hospitals. And in Indiana, if it's a private hospital, the hospital can decide. Now, we're not talking about the St. Vincent and the Catholic hospitals that they can hide beneath the Catholic Church and not provide abortions, but IU, Riverview Community Health, Franciscan Health, etc. Franciscan has also religious stuff. Okay, so those are a lot of different barriers to care. Let me explain to you what you have to do in Indiana to get an abortion. So you have to make an appointment.
Lee, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but can you just wrap up with some basic information so we give Sheila time?
Yeah, okay, sorry. So in Indiana, you have to have an 18-hour waiting period, so you have to have an appointment, you have to have an ultrasound, you have to offer, so there's a lot of barriers in the sense that you have to offer people to look at their ultrasound. The clock doesn't start till the ultrasound is done. There's a stack of forms that they have to sign, and you have to explain all of those. You have to talk to them now. There's a new thing. You have to tell them that there is a reversal, that there's a pill to reverse medication abortion, which is false, but you have to tell them that. And then they have 18-hour waiting period, and then they come in and have their abortion, which of course for some people is very limiting because they have to make either 2 days, or if they're coming from out of town, they have to stay in a hotel. Then you have to, in Indiana, you do not have to tell, in Indiana, you do have to tell them that the fetus can feel pain, which is a false statement. And you also have to, this whole notion that abortion, we're trying to save the woman from herself, right? From mental health consequences and whatnot. The truth of the matter is women who have abortions have very little mental health, in fact, less mental health consequences from their choice of having abortion than if they went on and had a baby. So I just wanted to end with that, I guess, and let Sheila talk now. I'm sorry if I talked too long. I meant to watch what I was doing, and I thank my husband for the glass of wine that he brought me, and I will sign off now.
Okay. Thanks, Lee. I appreciate it. Great information.
Yeah.
Sheila.
Okay. Before we talk about law, there are 3 things that we need to understand about the context of the legal debates that we're having about abortion. One philosophical, one historic, and one sociological. Liberal democracies are a lot like Judaism in this sense. They're grounded in the libertarian premise that we're all entitled to make our own moral life choices unless we're harming the person or the property of someone else, and so long as we're willing to give an equal right to others. In a liberal democracy, laws banning or requiring certain behaviors on moral grounds are not considered legitimate unless they reflect widespread public consensus. For example, virtually all Americans of any religion and no religion say rape, murder, and theft are wrong. When it comes to abortion, as has been pointed out, that consensus doesn't exist. Far from it. According to NPR, recent polls show that 3/4 of Americans want to keep abortion legal, although they will differ over some restrictions. Then historically, the pro-life movement, and I don't think this is widely known at all, the pro-life movement was not, as popular mythologies would suggest, a reaction to Roe v. Wade. It wasn't until 1979, a full 6 years after Roe, that evangelical leaders who were goaded by Paul Weyrich decided to use abortion as a wedge issue to deny Jimmy Carter a second term. And the reason, well, they thought that objecting to abortion would be more palatable and more likely to motivate religiously conservative Christian voters than the actual reason that they were so angry with Carter, which was the denial by the Carter administration of tax exemptions for the segregated schools that evangelicals had established after the decision in Brown v. Board of Education. Well, some things haven't changed. Sociological research tells us that whites who score high on measures of racial resentment and racial grievance are far more likely to support strict limits on abortion than whites who score low on those measures. And research also confirms that people who are very active in the pro-life movement are much more likely to be committed to a patriarchal worldview in which control of reproduction and female sexuality in particular is important if they're going to maintain the gender hierarchy that they support. So when you think about the history and the research, those things go a long way toward explaining why it's so difficult. Sandy asked this the other day, why is it so hard to have a civil conversation, an evidence-based logical discussion about abortion with anti-choice activists? And I think knowing the history and sociology sort of answers that question. And of course, all of that brings us to Texas and the Supreme Court's decision to punt, to allow the law to go into effect pending a ruling on its constitutionality. I think what too few people outside the legal community understand is that the consequences of upholding Texas law, if in fact the court eventually does that, and to be candid, I don't think they will, but it would be devastating, and it would extend far beyond the issue of abortion. It would achieve a long-standing goal of the so-called states' rights fundamentalists. That would be a return to the days where state and local lawmakers could impose their preferred morality on their citizens without worrying about the federal government interfering. Approval of Texas's ploy would open a door to civil chaos far beyond the abortion wars. State legislatures could turn private citizens into enforcers of pretty much any goal, and not just conservative ones. The decision would effectively approve what I would call federalism on steroids. And I'm not engaging in hyperbole here. It would effectively unravel the legally united states. I used to explain to my students that one of the virtues of applying the Bill of Rights to all levels of government, something, by the way, that did not happen until after the Civil War, was that it ensured a floor, so that when someone moves from New York to Alabama or Texas, they don't suddenly lose their right to religious liberty or free speech or their protections against unreasonable search and seizure. Texas law strikes a really terrifying blow against that principle. And another thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is why this law was crafted to create private vigilantes. The idea was that by enlisting private citizens to enforce the law, the state could avoid challenges to the bill's constitutionality. The theory is that since the state itself wouldn't be directly involved in enforcing the law, state officials would not be proper defendants to a lawsuit challenging it. And the reason that matters is that because in order to be protected by the Bill of Rights, there has to be a finding of state action, government action. The Bill of Rights protects us against government infringement of our liberties, not against intrusions by private actors. If there's no state action, there's no government action, there's no constitutional violation. There may be violation of other laws, but only government can violate the Bill of Rights. So they thought they were being very clever by avoiding direct government enforcement. Allowing Texas gambit to succeed would do a lot more than leave the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the country in place. It would encourage other states, Indiana evidently already, there's a couple of our wonderful legislators working on a similar measure. It would encourage other states to employ similar tactics, and not just for abortion, but for all sorts of culture war issues and from all political perspectives. Now, I will tell you why I say I don't believe that Texas's ploy will work. It shouldn't pass constitutional muster because there's an important case from the 1940s that is still good law that held, well, the issue there was deed covenants. I'm deeding you my property, and I have a covenant in there that says I cannot deed my property to an African-American person, or, those covenants were between buyer and seller, private parties. But the court found state action present because those private deed restrictions could only be enforced with the participation of judges, clerks, and other state officials. As I said, that case is still good law, and the vigilantes authorized by this legislation also may be private citizens, but the law can't be enforced without involving the apparatus of the state of Texas. The bottom line is that if successful, this effort would empower zealots of both the right and the left. And that's probably not what the idiots in the Texas legislature had in mind, but it would almost certainly be the consequence. But even a more conventional overruling or evisceration of Roe v. Wade, which is a distinct possibility in a case that's pending from Mississippi, would invite all kinds of unintended consequences. And we can discuss those if there's time for, and those are my theory anyway. But final point, as many of you know, my longstanding preoccupation has been with civic literacy, with the failure of so many Americans to understand even the most basic aspects of their own legal structure. The pandemic has given us a glaring illustration of the way that ignorance affects discussion of reproductive rights. We have officials and pundits insisting that they have the right to control their own bodies, that government can't tell them to be vaccinated. Ironically, most of the people making that argument are anti-choice. Todd Rokita comes to mind, and they're claiming a right for themselves that they are unwilling to extend to women. I should note that besides that breathtaking hypocrisy, they're also dead wrong. Government has a duty to prevent citizens from harming others, and the court has recognized government's right to require vaccinations, quarantines, and other public health measures for at least 100 years. In fact, the Rokitas of the world have it exactly backwards. As I believe one of my predecessors just pointed out, a woman who aborts poses no threat to her neighbors. A citizen who refuses to wear a mask or be vaccinated is a threat to his neighbors. And the law recognizes that distinction, even if a lot of Americans don't. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Really appreciate it. I just want to say one word, and then I don't know if Jessica would like to, Jessica Bunch, add anything quickly, but while we are doing that, I don't see any questions in the chat, and I'm sure you have questions. So please put them there for us. I just want to add a word about the religious community and its respect for life in general. Okay, I didn't mention, because I assumed you all knew this, that of course Judaism has a great deal of respect and love for families and children, and emphasizes the sanctity of all life. And that's because the same movements who have been against legislation against abortion have been supporting legislation for universal pre-K, for childcare, for healthcare extensions, against the death penalty. So clearly, these religious communities have a great deal to say about respect for life. So I just want to make that clarification. Yes, and then we have.
I think what we're looking at, there are people who are pro-birth, the measures that you're talking about are genuinely pro-life. There are an awful lot of people who, once that fetus emerges from the womb, have absolutely no desire to help it out. But yeah.
Right. So Jessica, I just want to give you an opportunity to say hello, and if you have a comment or two, and then we have a few questions in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for allowing me to join your meeting. I really appreciate a chance to have a virtual happy hour with everyone, some cocktails. As we said earlier, so I work for Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates. So I work on the advocacy side of these issues. So I'm down at the State House. I'm working with volunteers and with storytellers. And, you know, as you might have seen, we had thousands upon thousands of people rallying across the country on Saturday. And there's some points that that both Sheila and Dr. Metzler has said earlier today that go hand in hand. And I just want to raise a couple points because the impact of this heinous abortion ban in Texas can't be understated, right? This Texas law allows anyone, including protesters who have no connection to a patient, to act as bounty hunters to collect $10,000 to take doctors, health centers, anyone who helps another person access abortion care to court. And this law overwhelmingly harms Black, Indigenous, and Latino communities, people with low incomes, those of us who live in rural communities. We already struggle to access reproductive health care. I mean, you think I'm up here in Fort Wayne, right? You have to travel at least 2.5 hours anywhere to receive access to abortion. And what's worse is that this abortion access in Indiana has been shrinking for years, long before this Texas abortion ban. As many of you know, Indiana has actually passed more abortion restrictions than any other state in the country besides Louisiana. And we've already had legislators like Liz Brown, a fellow Fort Wayne person, announce that she's bringing this to the State House in January. Indiana already ranks 48th when it comes to maternal mortality, and it's a crisis that's killing Black women at 2.5 times the national rate. If Indiana was to institute a total abortion ban, experts predict we would see a 21% increase in the number of pregnancy-related deaths and a 33% increase among Black women. Because no matter how hard abortion is to access, those with resources are still going to be able to receive care. And those who don't have access to resources because of generations of racist public policies, they won't be able to receive the care that they need. So there's so much that we all have to lose. We don't live single issue lives like we talked about earlier, right? This all falls under that reproductive justice frameworks, because they're not just coming after our access to reproductive rights, but it's immigration rights and LGBTQ rights and civil rights and voting rights and so much more. So I'm happy to answer questions along with my fellow colleagues. As an organizer, I always have a plug-in and ask if anyone is interested in doing any volunteer work this fall with Planned Parenthood, or you have a story. We're starting a new pilot program of storytellers where we're training folks how to tell their story when it comes to anything regarding reproductive justice, right? So whether it's accessing affordable housing, accessing birth control, your abortion story, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a few questions here. I think I can follow them. One from Amy Kressel and Bruce Feppers asks, please comment on the role of sexual assault. Many women and girls are assaulted and become pregnant as a result. Lee, you want to take that?
Well, sure. I mean, historically, even the most restrictive of abortion, anti-abortion laws has made an exception for rape or incest. The truth of the matter is that any non-consensual sex is an assault, right? And so if you could be in a relationship where you're assaulted on a daily basis by your significant other, your husband, your wife, your, a family member. And this particular law in Texas does not make an exception for rape or incest. And I will tell you, so there was a senator, maybe a senator, I can't remember if it was a senator, I'll be honest, somebody testifying before Congress the other day, probably Thursday of last week, who said, and I quote, 6 weeks is ample time for somebody who has been a victim of sexual assault to know they're pregnant and to seek abortion care. Now, let me reiterate, 6 weeks means you've missed your period for 2 weeks. You have been sexually assaulted, which means you are under, in most cases, in all cases, a tremendous amount of psychological, physical, mental, emotional anguish. You might, and probably are not thinking clearly. You may have irregular cycles. You may not know anything. So that's one thing. If you call, by the way, 90%, I meant to tell you this, 90% of United States counties do not have abortion providers. 90%. So let that one sink in for a minute. So let's say then you try to find abortion care in those 2 weeks that you have now recognized that you've been raped, you're pregnant, and you want an abortion, and there's waiting periods. So in Indiana, it's 18 hours, but in some places it's 24 hours, and in some places it's up to 48 hours. So let's imagine that you could even find an abortion provider. Then you probably have to find the money. You have to find a way to take 2 days, maybe off work, or maybe you have other children, and then you have to get it done, and that you have 2 weeks to do that. So I know for a fact that that's impossible. So first of all, I still want to make sure that I stress, I mean, sexual assault is vastly underreported and is always a crime, in my opinion, regardless of whether it's in the vast majority of sexual assault, of course, takes place between people who know each other. I still want to clarify that I do not believe there should be any qualifications or whatever the word I'm looking for, but you can't think of right now because I'm old, on abortion care, whether you've been raped or whether it's just not right for you right now, whether your birth control failed, whether you had a one-night stand and you forgot. I don't care why you want an abortion. There should be no stipulation on what's okay and what's not, right? So as far as your reasons, because they're your reasons and they're between you and whoever you want to share those reasons with, or nobody. You don't have to share them with me as an abortion provider. I don't ask people to tell me why they want an abortion, although, you know, I don't do the counseling part. That's done prior to my visit with them, because of course they have to come twice. But again, it's none of anybody's business. But as to sexual assault, you know, technically in a lot of places, there are exceptions for rape, sexual assault, and incest. The Texas law does not make such a concession.
Thanks, Lee. There are a bunch of questions that have to do with religion, so I will take them briefly, and then I have a question for Sheila. The question are, you know, since religious beliefs are a great part of the arguments for abortion and prohibition, can separation of church and state be part of an argument opposing restrictions? That's from Alan Hamburger. And Patrice Widener talks about a coalition of religious groups that can fight the issue. And Pierre says, is there a move to organize Jewish clergy to write an amicus brief? Now, I don't have all the details, but there is a religious coalition for reproductive rights that has been in existence for a very long time. I'm assuming they're in the process of writing something. They bring a clergy together. There are rabbis for reproductive choice. I think I joined a coalition of 1,000 rabbis. So there are lots of groupings where clergy are making their voices heard. I'd have to check who's actually writing a brief. I don't know, Sheila, if you know or not, but lots of gatherings of clergy. Also, I wanted to ask if Sheila knew anything about the Women's Health Protection Act that was passed through You look at me confused.
Yes, I do.
Well, what didn't Congress not, I mean, I heard about a Women's Health Protection Act that would protect abortion access nationally and prohibit
Oh.
medically unnecessary restrictions on abortion.
Yeah.
That was passed by the House and of course it's
Yeah.
not going anywhere in the Senate. But is there anything you can tell us about that?
Only that it'll be dead on arrival in the Senate. We have a real problem with the fact that, thanks to the movement of population, in the next 10 years, demographers tell us that 30% of Americans will have 2/3 of the Senate as their representatives, and 70% of Americans will have 30% of the Senate. We have a real problem. We have farmland voting is what, so the only answer I have is that we've got to change the Senate. I don't know, as I think Dennis pointed out in the introduction, I ran for Congress. For 35 years, I was a Republican. I will say that the party that exists today is not the party I belonged to or joined. And the people I know in my advanced age group, and it is pretty advanced, are not voting Republican anymore, are appalled by what happened. We've got a white supremacy party, and then we've got the Democrats. And the problem I see that's political, and in a very strange way, Texas may actually help us. But the problem is sane people have left the Republican Party. They're either independents or so the Democrats now have everybody from pretty conservative to crazy liberal, and then they're being yelled at because they've got a circular firing squad. I mean, it's very difficult when they have to come up with legislation that satisfies that breadth of ideology. And you've got the old saying about Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line, so you've got a difficult political time. And when I said that I think if Roe goes down, either because it's been eviscerated by the Mississippi case, or I really don't believe that they will uphold the Texas, but hey, I've been wrong about so much. But if that happens, I think the outcry that you saw yesterday with all of the women marching in 600 cities is just a taste of my hope is that it will be one of those situations where you say, be careful what you wish for, because the Republicans have been able to turn out voters who are one issue voters for a very long time by promising them we're going to get Roe v. Wade. Well, it's sort of like the dog catching the car, now what do you do with it? I think that the women who have felt that their rights were safe are waking up to the fact that their rights aren't safe, and there's a whole lot of them. So one of the unanticipated consequences of losing Roe might well be that we get a political response that allows that bill that was passed by the House to actually become law.
Thank you. There's more information about the bill that Jessica put in there and that Lee added, the Women's Health Protection Act. So I'm not going to read that all because it'll take too much time, but you can take a look at that. There is another, thank you so much for that information. Zeb Winokur asks, do you see this insidious strategy of deputizing private citizens to sue as a new normal for other women's issues, such as preventing access to birth control, shaming women who report sexual assault, etc.? And I'm curious about that, but I'm also curious, like, do you ever think there's going to be free access to contraceptives? Okay, those are just two questions. I don't know. if
So
you
let's talk about that. So free access, you meaning, so the Affordable Care Act made it so that contraception was a part of your healthcare, right? It should be
Yeah.
free of charge. That doesn't mean it's free of charge to see the doctor, because that's a whole nother issue, because, you know, we don't have universal healthcare for our country. As far as the vigilante laws, I agree with you. That, you know, we are setting a precedent here for something very frightening in our future, and that is that we can deputize anybody to basically bring lawsuits against other people, and then we are incentivizing them to do that for money or revenge or whatever, and that is, if we set that precedent, we could, and we will be in for a world of trouble. Now, if you think about the fact that I meaning people who are, you know, pro women's health,
Sane.
pro whatever, sane, you know, if we wanted to, and could, and maybe should, you know, use this to our advantage, you know, we could just, you know, you find a state where there's a supermajority of sane people, and you say, okay, so now we're going to make it that if you don't have a COVID vaccine, people can sue you, right, for X amount of money. And we're going to pass that law, even though it may be unconstitutional, doesn't matter, because we're going to deputize the private citizens to sue their neighbors or their, you know, grocery store clerk or whomever, if they suspect they don't have a COVID vaccine, because that could be harmful to others. And then we could do the same thing. Same with guns, right? We could say, okay, well, we're going to make it illegal in the state of California to own a gun, even though it's your Second Amendment right. And we're going to deputize private citizens to bring suit against their neighbors and their colleagues and their grocery store clerks, again, if they suspect they have a gun. And again, it's ridiculous, because of course that would never happen, because, you know, we should never tread on someone's right to own a firearm, but we can tread on someone's right to their own bodily autonomy, and so that's a big problem. But there are other, you know, people just, I don't know that they see that there are other issues that we could do the same thing to if we chose to do that. Right now, we in the state of Indiana cannot, because we live in a red state, and nobody's going to do any of those things. But there are places where perhaps it could. The other thing of interest, and maybe Sheila can speak on this, someone, a smart person that I read an article by, mentioned that another way around it is if you may, so government employees have qualified immunity to being sued, right? So that you can't sue government employees, or, you know,
Well, that's police. Police
Right.
that qualify, yeah.
But others too. So
Yeah.
why couldn't you make abortion providers? Now it would of course require that the government do this, but either make abortion providers somehow government employees, or you know, you can't sue a police officer for killing somebody in the line of duty, right? So why should you be able to sue a doctor for performing a medical procedure that they deem as necessary in the line of duty, right? So if you could do that and make or you could say you did mobile clinics and you made the clinic a government entity so that it couldn't be, I don't know, there seems to maybe there would be some legal recourse for this.
It's a lot more complicated.
I'm sure it is.
than
I'm
that.
simplifying,
And
because I'm a doctor, not a lawyer, and I don't understand all the legal ramifications.
That's okay. That's why I didn't go to medical school. But qualified immunity is an interesting issue, but it doesn't extend to all kinds of government. And so that wouldn't work, is what I'm saying. Of course not.
I want to ask a question. I wonder if Jessica can enlighten us on this issue that I knew about, and I'm happy to hear that a donor made possible to have a Planned Parenthood clinic in Fort Wayne, because I knew the clinic was shut down. And if you could explain this, no one, even though an individual wanted to rent, to have another Planned Parenthood clinic, there was pressure from outside saying, if you rent to that person, we'll never do business with you again.
Well, the
So
original provider, she was like basically run out of town by unfriendly other physicians who posed as supporters. And then when she got to town, they told her basically, you know, we'll ruin your career if you do this. And she wasn't willing. That was my impression. This was several years ago.
Yeah,
that was.
I also
a few
think they
years
wouldn't
ago.
rent. So I'm really curious
Yeah.
because I want people to realize how there's a lot of influence going on to make it possible. So go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so I think we're dealing with a couple different things up here in Fort Wayne. I know it's crazy to think in a red state we could be even more red than we are, but unfortunately, Fort Wayne is the hotbed when it comes to conservatives and folks who are against reproductive health rights. So multiple issues have happened in Fort Wayne. Like I mentioned, we had a provider who was targeted in her home neighborhood campus, calling her a baby killer. We did not provide abortions in Fort Wayne at the time. But the issue that Rabbi Sasso is talking about is our lease ended in 2019, in like the beginning of 2019, and we were on a month-to-month lease. Our landlord decided that they did no longer wanted protesters outside their other businesses and terminated, too late, my words aren't coming out. They canceled our lease, they ended it, it was over. And so we then were struggling finding another place to rent. There were outside forces that were threatening all potential landlords and potential realtors that they would let everyone know in town what kind of business they were dealing with, and that they would make sure that no one does business with them again. Luckily, we were able to enter in a great partnership and have now merged with the Planned Parenthood Great Northwest and Hawaiian Islands, which is part of Washington, Idaho, Alaska, and Hawaii. So we are now all combined with 6 states, Indiana, Kentucky included. And because of this, they had a little bit more money in their pocketbooks than what we had in 2019. And so they were able to purchase a location. So now we have a permanent location in Fort Wayne that nobody can kick us out of. We own it. It is our building. We're still not providing abortions currently at this location.
Provider, yeah, okay.
Nope, not yet. But the most exciting news is, well, I think we have 2 exciting news. The great one is that we had a very generous donor donate a large sum of money to provide free birth control to anyone who comes into the Fort Wayne Planned Parenthood clinic. Right. It was their dream from seeing this happen in other larger cities and other states that they wanted to make it happen in their city. So folks can get any form of birth control that they would like at the Fort Wayne clinic. No questions asked, no fees that they have to pay. Everything's completely covered by this donor and then folks' insurance if they have it and all of that. Another really exciting that's happening for all of our clinics in Indiana and Kentucky is that we're also now offering gender affirming care at all of our clinics. And that's something that our Western states have had for a couple of years. And so we're really excited to be able to provide this care to a community that really needs it in Indiana.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm happy to hear that. We are coming close to the end of our time together. I really want to thank Sheila and Lee for giving us so much information and material that we can move forward with. I'm very, very appreciative. Jessica, you came on at the last minute, and I'm so glad you did because you really helped us with some current issues. I want to make, and all of you who joined and all the people who in the comments, we're very grateful. I want to make one thing clear. all the religious voices, and actually all the voices who speak for the right to have an abortion, is not to tell women that this is the right choice. It's to allow women to make that choice. And some people who are for women making that choice would not make that choice for themselves. So it's important to know that this is not to impose a position on anyone, but rather to allow individual women to consider their health in consultation with those who they feel like physicians and clergy and family that they feel they want to. So that's partly of what the issues are about. Dennis, did you want to say? I can't believe you were quiet for my whole conversation.
I just
That's
want to
so
make a quick
unusual.
statement really quick. I did email Jackie earlier because I didn't want to, clutter up this discussion. A list of, if anybody is interested, and I think Jessica included, if you want to share your story, but if anybody's interested in knowing what they can do, because that's always a thing, like, okay, we can talk about it, but what can we do? I emailed her a list of, specifically for Texas, places where you can donate money. Texas has a number of, there's a fairly large group of advocates there that are in the OBGYN community and other physician communities that I follow. And so I emailed her a list of places that you can donate your resources to, and also money to elect people in the 2022 midterms who will help to, shall we say, get rid of some of these restrictive laws in Texas. And then, of course, you can always donate to Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky, and et cetera. And there's a couple other places in Indiana. And I didn't know if, Jessica, if you had any other suggestions for local places other than, of course, volunteering or donating money to Planned Parenthood here. I know.
Yeah, I think, sorry to jump in, but the Hoosier Abortion Fund,
Okay.
that's run by All Options
Perfect.
Pregnancy Resource Center, does amazing work at, we talked about earlier, that 18-hour waiting
Right.
period in Indiana. They help people not only fund their abortion, but fund making sure they're able to get a ride and if they need a place to stay. And they are also currently doing a diaper drive right now for also folks who need access to diapers.
I also
Jessica,
think,
your email is in the chat. So if people have questions, is it okay if they email you?
Yes, of course.
Okay, that would be well. And I know I didn't mean not to thank Jackie and Sherry, who are always there for us and somehow make all this technology work. Thank you so much. And okay, Dennis, you have a word to say.
Just a closing word of thank you to Sandy and to Sheila and to Lee and to Jessica and to all of you for joining tonight. I think it's important that we understand that these issues are important issues for our children to be educated about. Our teens and who will become young adults and members of our society need to be informed and educated and sensitized to these issues. It's important for us as individuals and for organizations who stand for civil rights not to be intimidated and not to feel that by standing for choice, they are in any way rocking the boat. On the contrary, what we are doing by standing for this is steadying the course of American democracy and civilization. So thank you for being part of tonight's conversation, and we look forward to many other opportunities of sensitizing and educating one another and our community. Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone. And if you missed any part of this, the recording will be housed on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining us this evening, and our amazing panelists. Thank you.